Welcome to OkState Daily. Casey Porter here, joined by Chase Whiska on a week where the Cowboys are getting set for Senior Day. Last home game, obviously, of the season. A game that Texas Tech is favored by 4.5. So, Chase, hey, welcome in, and what are you looking forward to on Saturday?
Just time to recognize the guys that have been here for a long time. You know, the guys that have contributed a lot to the program, spent a lot of their time here. Not only poured a lot into the program, but to Stillwater and Oklahoma State and stuff like that. Vernon Presley's kind of the first guy that comes to mind for me. I think everybody knows how I feel about that guy. I'm a big fan. He loves Oklahoma State. He loves Stillwater. And I think moving forward, these days are going to be really hard to have. And you're definitely not going to have the number of guys that you're going to have this year proceeding. I think they have 20-something guys that they're honoring before the game. And like I said, with where college football's at now, I don't think you're going to get that anymore. So it's going to be a special one. That
is a good point that, as college football fans, and certainly Oklahoma State fans, you get attached to your players, right? I mean, you're attached to Vernon Presley. You're attached to Ollie Gordon. You're attached to maybe a Nick Martin or a Colin Oliver or somebody like that because they've been here for a while and they've represented the university we love for so long. And I think that's a really nice point that it's going to get more transactional as the transfer portal and NIL continue to affect college football. So maybe enjoy one of the last few really big senior days. That's another reason to come out to the ballpark, if you will.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if next year you're looking at 5 to 10, maybe. You never know what's going to happen. I was listening to the press conference earlier this week. Colin Oliver was brought up. Nick Martin was brought up. Ollie Gordon is not on the list, but has everybody anticipates him going to the NFL. Along with those other two guys. So you lose 3 huge components, 4 if you count Vernon Presley. Those are just guys that maybe were on the verge. So you lose 4 huge components of your team, guys that have represented Stillwater and Oklahoma State for a long time. They've represented them really well. Special players, special talent, just good guys, hard guys not to root for.
You are a huge Mike Gundy fan. I have always supported Mike Gundy. We have stated several different times on this channel and on this show independently. I mean, everybody here has their own opinions, and there is no guiding one way or the other, and that's what makes it fun, the conversations too. But we all agree. We're either anywhere from being big Mike Gundy fans to at least agreeing he's not anywhere as close to being removed at this time. So I ask you, a big fan of Mike Gundy, somebody who's really supported him so many different times, what do you think about that press conference Monday and just kind of the comments, the stoic comments about, hey, I just kind of wish we would have been had better health on the defensive side of the ball. He didn't make it look like there were going to be any changes maybe in the offseason, that kind of thing.
I don't know. I don't take a lot from those press conferences, to be honest with you. I just watch them to watch them. To see if there's anything that is interesting, so I like I said, I don't really look too deeply into those. It is what it is. He's not a guy that's going to come out and talk about changes that he's going to make. He's not a guy that's going to, talk about all that stuff. You saw that a couple of years ago when that question was brought up. And I think honestly, he probably handled it how he should this time. I think you look at the last time that he answered that question, there was definitely a change in his answer and the change in how he went about answering that question. And I think that was probably a more proper way to do it because he didn't say that there weren't going to be any changes made,
right? But
he also didn't say that there were. So, take with that what you will. I respect the answer. I have no issue with it.
He did kind of lead on to his thoughts weren't that there needed to be changes made. His thoughts were that instead they just need to be healthy. I kind of did take that out of it, though.
Yeah, I mean, and hey, is he wrong? Maybe yes, maybe no. You lose 2 of the best defenders in the nation. 2 of the best defenders in the country. But it all comes back to you have to have guys that have got to replace them. Mm-hmm. There can't be a huge drop off, and I felt like there was a huge drop off this year. So that's something that you have to look into in the future. I hope this is just kind of another learning moment, and they take advantage of it. We had a crappy year last year. This is not going to happen again. We have to change the way that we recruit and change the way that we go about things. And I think since NIL and the transfer portal, all that stuff, it seems like it's old, but it's still really new. So there's going to be continuous learning, not only for Oklahoma State and Mike Gundy and whoever, but every other coach in the country is having to deal with this. Every other program in the country is having to deal with this, and it's definitely a learning curve. So I hope that that's what happens. I hope they take this and make the best of it. Hey, this is what happened in 2024, and it's not going to happen again.
I think that can explain injuries, can explain why the defense wasn't as good or dropped off, maybe even substantially. But it doesn't explain how you just completely fall off the cliff to be literally the worst defense in Division I in several different metrics. I don't think you can explain that through injuries. But having said that, we've seen, even with all these teams throughout the United States, certainly in this Big 12 conference, the margins are so slim. There's going to be weird seasons by all sorts of teams. You're going to have teams like Indiana that just have the right mix that year, and they have the right schedule, kind of like Oklahoma State had last year, and they have great years. Then you're going to have teams like K-State, who you just inexplicably can't explain why Avery Johnson can't move the ball in Arizona State at home, and they can't score touchdowns, and they lose a couple of games. Oklahoma State has a weird year. OU,
Utah.
If they don't beat Alabama or LSU, aren't going to be in a bowl. So I don't think teams are going to have weird years like this, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in my opinion, obviously I'm an Oklahoma State fan, but this college football season has been a lot of fun to watch. Take Oklahoma State out of it, watching every other football game has been enjoyable because you really don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You go back to the Alabama Vanderbilt game. Nobody would have thought that Vanderbilt was going to beat Alabama. Indiana, nobody gave them any sort of chance to be even remotely good. And they're competing for the Big Ten, and that's a tough conference to win. And then you look at Michigan, who's like, where did they go? They win a national championship, and then they disappear.
Florida State.
Yeah, exactly. Florida State's probably the closest thing that I can think of to Oklahoma State right now.
Oh, they've been worse.
They have been, but I'm saying in comparison to, if you want to compare programs, that's probably another situation that is pretty similar to what we have here. It's not it's not an enjoyable thing.
No, it's not.
And it's two teams that, if you were to ask a lot of people, Florida State was going to win the ACC this year. If you were to ask a lot of people, Oklahoma State or Utah was going to win the Big 12 this year. Neither of which are going to happen.
Or K-State.
Yeah, and they're not even close.
Yeah.
So it's as a
and Arizona State and BYU were going to finish at the bottom.
Yeah, exactly. I'll say this as a college football fan, this has been the best year of college football to watch, just because it's so unpredictable, and you do have all these really close games, and the atmospheres and stuff like that. It seems to change because now 12 teams have a chance to win a national championship instead of 4. So there's a lot that is riding on the line going into this year. I wasn't really sure how it was going to go. I thought, and then everything that I thought did not happen. It's been fun in that way, if that makes sense.
It has. Or are you kind of? What kind of overall mood are you with? Of course, I talked with Scott on our last podcast. You go through that just angry as hell mode, like trying to figure things out and who's to blame. And I'm so pissed as an OSU fan. Then you kind of get resigned to, well, it's just a bad year. Let's just get this thing over with, right? So kind of where are you at in this process? That's where I'm at. It is what it is. After whoever we played after BYU, I can't remember. Was it Baylor? Yeah. Okay. After the Baylor game is when I kind of just gave up. And I don't mean give up, but I was just kind of like, I'm going to stop getting frustrated and mad over this because it's not worth it. It's really not. So it's not going to change. So why control what you can control, right? Exactly. And there's no signs of it getting any better, so right. I don't. That's what I mean. Yeah. I'm not going to let the outcome of these next 2 weeks dictate how I feel, not only about
just my everyday going about every day, but it's not going to change how I feel about Oklahoma State. It's not going to change the fact that I'm going to watch the football games next year. Nothing like that is going to change for me. I just kind of, teams have bad years. It's a bad year.
They do.
Yeah, and you used Oklahoma as an example. They're having a bad year too. Florida State's having a horrible year. And then you have the guys that are coming from the bottom to the top. So that's just how college football is going to be from here on out, to be honest with you. In my opinion, I think that, whoever wins the national championship this year, I'm not saying they're going to be Florida State bad, but there's a good chance they may not compete for a national championship next year. That's just how it's going. And that's how it's going to go until they put some sort of restrictions and stipulations and all this stuff on NIL and the transfer portal.
I do know the worst thing you can do is just overcorrect and have a bunch of knee-jerk reactions. I've said many different times, I think Mike Gundy is way too slow to correct, but then I think he's right in the sense that the last thing you want to do is overcorrect, because if you overcorrect, you can end up in a way worse situation than you're in right now. So it's kind of that teeter-totter, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And would I like to see both coordinators removed and find new coordinators for both offense and defense? Yes, but that's a big change.
I've been saying that for how long now?
I know, yeah. And it's fine. You've got me to come around because I'm out of the emotional state of things.
Sure.
To me, I have my own opinions. I would rather see Nardo go before Casey Dunn. And yep. I might get yelled at on here. That's okay. Nardo has just been progressively getting worse. Casey Dunn at least throws out a couple good games every year, just enough to keep his job, in my opinion. Now, do I think that you get rid of Nardo this year and then see what happens next? Because I think Casey Dunn's contract is up after next year. I could be wrong. But if it is, then that's the perfect, you're not having to buy out. You're not having to do any of that. You're just going to say, hey, man, let's go our separate ways because I've already canned a defensive coordinator and had to pay him. So now we've completed your contract and we're going to move on.
Well, they're 2-year contracts, and whenever they were signed last.
Okay.
So Nardo's, I think, would be up at the end of this year.
Is it?
I don't know. Don't quote me on that, but I think they've all signed 2-year contracts.
Okay. I have no idea. And if it is, that's even better. Then you're not having to buy somebody out. But like I said, I've never been a fan of removing coordinators in the middle of the season, especially if you have nothing to fight for at that point. Ride the year out and then get rid of them. I think that's probably what's best for Oklahoma State football. But I would definitely say that Nardo is probably the first one that needs to go.
Yeah. So just reading here, second-year defensive coordinator Brian Nardo's raise of $50,000 brought his salary to $700,000. That does not say when it is due, so please don't quote me on that. That's like literally the world's worst as far as my sweet spot. The business side of things is definitely not my sweet spot. So, hey, moving forward, what are you looking forward to this weekend? If you're a fan, if you're Coach Gundy, what makes it a successful weekend beyond winning?
I would just say just giving the fans something to cheer about, and I know that sounds very cliche and, low expectations and stuff like that, but he keeps talking about how they're practicing good and stuff like that. I would just love to see it translate, just one time before the year is over. And I think that if they have a chance to win either of these last two games, it's going to be against Texas Tech.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be against Colorado.
Right.
And go out with a bang at Boone Pickens for your last home game. Go win a football game. So outside of winning, it's really hard to say because this is your last home game. This is senior day. There's a lot of outside driving factors that should force you, it should make you want to win this game. Not only just for the sake of the locker room and the sanity of the coaching staff and the players and stuff like that, but you have guys that have been here for a long time, and this is by far their worst year that they've experienced. Mm-hmm. So let them go out on a high note here and go on the road to Colorado and see what happens. But let them leave Stillwater a winner. I think that's my biggest thing.
By the way, all 10 on the field coaches for Oklahoma State They all signed 2-year contracts in February.
Okay.
So everybody has one more year on their contract coming in. So, okay, Chase, you've coached a lot. You've played a lot. So if you're Mike Gundy or you're a position coach and you have all these guys that have had this season to where it hasn't gone the way they wanted, how do you motivate them? I mean, beyond the fact that it's senior day, fine. Let's say, it's okay, it's senior day, so you're happy about that. But then you go out and Barrett Morton and Taj Brooks score a couple of times and it's 14-0. And our offense is just kind of meandered around like it's done in the last couple of games early on. Our defense is still not stopping anybody. If you're Mike Gundy, how do you handle that situation?
They have to have pride in themselves, and if you want to play selfish football, that's fine, but have pride in something,
Yeah.
Don't let this happen, because I don't know what their thought process is in the locker room and stuff like that. They're a talented football team. They're not a good football team, but they're talented. They're a talented football team. So, I would say just to have some pride and pride in yourself. You've worked your butt off from January to now. You've invested hours upon hours upon hours. Let that product show. And don't let it go to waste. That's my biggest thing. And not only that, but if you have guys that are wanting to stick around next year with the roster cuts, eventually they're planning to stay on the roster. So use that as motivation. And I'm not gonna. I wouldn't say this if I was coaching this team or anything like that. But if you're a player and you're going to enter the transfer portal, you better put up some daggum film, because what's going to happen is you're going to be stuck in the portal with 40,000 other football players, and you're not going to have anywhere to go. Right. So, there's a lot.
They don't realize that, but that's exactly what's going to happen to them.
No, absolutely. Yep. I can't tell you my legitimate guess of football players, and I could be over or under. I have no idea, but I would guess that from NCAA Division I to NCAA Division III, I bet you there are over 3,000 football players in the transfer portal. And
I'll bet 40%, only about 40% or less, improve their position.
I would agree 100%. So like I said, I would not encourage somebody to, hey, go put on film for yourself so you can leave here. That's not how I would approach it. But I would say, hey, you guys that want to come back, we do look at how you performed, all season. So if you have a lack of effort,
right,
or if you're constantly busting, or you're constantly, not making tackles, if you're not running hard, if you're not running good routes, if you're not coming off the ball hard, if you're throwing bad balls, and there's so many things that go into it. If you're doing these things, then I don't want you back.
Right.
What they don't understand too is that they are very replaceable at this point.
Of course.
Because there are no restrictions. You can go out and get whoever you want.
Well, we suck. So if you're on this team, okay, then you are replaceable.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Point blank, and that's exactly how I would put it to the kids. Hey, that's literally my exact message. Y'all can be pissed at me all you want. You can think that I'm being too blunt or whatever. I'm going to tell you point blank, brother, this team sucks. This season has sucked. So if you think that you're any kind of special or whatever, or that you're going to get special treatment, or that you're not replaceable, then go to Purdue or go wherever the hell you think you need to go, because I assure you, we can find a lot of players that can go 3-7.
No, absolutely.
Literally, that's my message. Now, they may say, screw you, coach, and it would be adios, sayonara. I'm going to find me 105 kids that will play for the brand like Paul Duran did, like Billy Stone did, like Stacy Satterwhite did, like T.D. Bryant did, like Terrence Richardson did, all the guys that I'm getting ready to talk to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you can even go up to, say, the guys at Alabama, the guys at Ohio State. Every single one of those guys, except for maybe a couple, are all replaceable, because I guarantee you that there is some good football player at, we'll just use Colorado for an example, and they're having a great year. I'm not taking away from any of that, but there's a freshman offensive lineman at Colorado that could probably go and start anywhere he wanted to in the country.
Yeah,
honestly, and you have those kids kind of everywhere because of the NIL stuff. Schools that may not be as good, Missouri, who may not be as good of a football team, is offering more money than an OU or an Alabama or wherever. So I'm going to go to Missouri. So what I'm saying is there's guys that are at every single school that can replace guys at every other single school, if that makes sense.
You have your handful of playmakers, and everybody else is a lot more replaceable than them.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm not saying you can replace a Travis Hunter or a Shadur Sanders, guys
That's
like
your
that.
Playmakers.
Exactly. Yeah. But you can replace about 75% of your roster, to be honest.
Well, that's always been Mike Gundy's philosophy is that you go get a Bolitnikov type receiver, you'll get one of the best running backs in the United States of America, you get a second receiver that's an NFL caliber jump ball type of physical guy, you get a really, really, really good quarterback, and then everybody else you go get on the 3-star train, right? I mean, and it's worked like crazy.
Yeah.
No, and that goes to show you right there.
It still can work. It really can. What you're missing right now is probably the biggest thing is you're missing a quarterback. You don't have a quarterback, really like a stud. You don't have a quarterback right now. And I think I'm not putting all this season, the whole season's blame on Alan Bowman, but it's different if you have a guy that you want to rally behind a little bit.
Either.
No, you don't, but you can't score points, And my defense to that, and I hate the defense. The defense is terrible, but the defense plays a whole lot because the offense can't move the football.
It works together.
So it's not a very well-oiled machine right now, and it doesn't work
exact
well
opposite
together.
of last year.
Yeah. Last year it was the same players, and it was a completely different product.
Mm-hmm. Different schedule.
Yeah, well, yeah, but you don't have an OU. You didn't, and I know they didn't play Texas last year, but you don't have a Texas. I think.
Well, they did play Texas
last year.
They got their ass kicked
in the Big 12 championship game. Yeah, I just meant regular season.
Yeah.
But I would argue that this is probably a lot easier of a schedule, in my opinion. If you were to compare the teams.
No question. Yeah.
This was their chance to really be successful. And I think that next year it's going to be a little bit more difficult. I don't know what next year's schedule looks like, nor do I really care right now, to be honest with you. But it is what it is. That's kind of where I'm at. So
I just think college football is such a volatile situation now that I just don't know why, unless you're just upset like with the admin. That's a whole different deal. But I wouldn't let this year affect your excitement towards next year. Because, just look at BYU. Look at Arizona State. Look at Oklahoma State, Florida State. Look at this thing flips on its head, man. Oklahoma State, you get the right quarterback, you get the right running back, which they easily can do. Because I'm telling you, Oklahoma State's going to be a very attractive place for receivers and running backs and quarterbacks and that kind of deal in the transfer portal as long as Mike Gundy is here. And I know Oklahoma State fans won't want to hear this, but as long as Casey Dunn is here, this is going to be an attractive place for skilled players on the offensive side of the ball. So you get the right guys in place, you change your defense or whatever it is just to be okay, right? And you figure out how to play a little bit better complementary football. And this thing could easily flip on its head next year. So I would caution fans. Now, I'm not trying to preach. You do you, I do me, right? That kind of thing. But I would preach that I wouldn't let this year and just the wins and losses affect how excited I would be going into next year and whether I plan on supporting the program or not.
Yeah, you're not wrong there whatsoever. I do think that if there's not a change at the defensive coordinator position or the offensive,
kind of changes.
whichever one,
Yeah.
you have to show that this year didn't go very well, and somebody's gonna have to be held accountable for it. And whether that it's not going to be Mike Gundy, nor do I think it should be. And people can do what they want and think what they want, but you have to show some sort of change so that recruits and people in the portal and outside people, they're like, hey, they're trying to make this better.
Sure.
That's my outlook on it, because if you don't make any change, I think that shows that you're not willing to, you're not willing to accept what happened this year. You're not willing to say
you're in denial.
Exactly. What you're telling other people is you're like, it was just a bad year. We just had some bad luck. No, you got to make a change. You have to make a change, and whether that's offensive, defensive, whatever, you got to change something because nothing's working right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the problem you're going to have is Mike Gundy's going to have his last press conference. This happened 2 years ago. Here's the biggest problem we're going to have. He's going to have his last press conference, and if anybody even dares ask him a question about any of the changes he's going to make in the offseason, he's going to holler and scream and threaten to take away the media credentials of whoever asked that question. And then what people don't realize in that situation is that is the last chance you're going to have to talk to Mike Gundy until the spring. So when will Oklahoma State fans have the ability, or the media, to hold his feet to the fire and actually ask him the questions about, hey, what changes are we going to see that would make us excited about next year? That's the problem you have, is he's not going to offer that opportunity for any Oklahoma State fans or media.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that would it be nice to know? Yes. Do we have a right to know what he's going to do? No.
But we have the right to know if he's going to make changes.
Sure.
Hey, Mike, is this acceptable? Is there going to be what level of changes are there going to be made? None, some, a lot. We have the right as fans to know that, how excited I should be about next year. Now, what changes? No right.
Right.
But whether there's going to be changes and what level of changes, I think we have a right.
I think the response that you would get is, I need to sit down and look at it and think about it and stuff like that, which I don't really have an issue with.
Even if it affects ticket sales.
I don't think that he's necessarily going to. If you've been around Oklahoma State football long enough, you know the response that you're going to get. So that's my opinion. And I wouldn't take it. Like I said, I don't really pay attention to his press conferences because he doesn't like to release a lot of information, and it is what it is. That's who he is as a person, and that's there's no issue with it. Yeah. That's his personality. So do I think there's going to be changes made? Yes. Do I think that he's going to tell you? No. But I do think you will find out around the first part to middle of December because of the portal. That's when the portal opens and stuff like that. And you're going to have a lot of athletes coming into them. So what you're going to need to do is not only get rid of that guy, but find somebody else to take his place, which he may or may not have already done. That's not to our knowledge and none of our business.
It is, right, correct.
So I do think that he's aware of, obviously, when the window's open and, man, I have to have a guy in place so that I can start recruiting from the portal so guys see who we have and who they connect with, and I need to let that guy recruit those guys.
Yeah, good point.
So I think that you would have an answer, honestly, within the next month as to if there's going to be changes made or not. Yeah, and he doesn't have to come out and say it, but there's going to be news about it. Some way, somehow, word is going to get out. And it may not be from Mike Gundy's mouth, but the word is going to get out. So you're going to find out within the next month if there's going to be changes or not.
So if that's going to happen and word's going to get out, and he is going to make changes, right? And he already knows, if he's going to make changes, he already knows.
Right.
These next two games aren't going to affect any of that, right?
No.
So that being the case, what does he stand to lose by saying, hell yeah, we're going to make changes? Did you guys watch this crap on the field this year? Of course I'm going to make changes. I'm competitive, right? What does he stand to lose by telling us that, hell yes, I'm making changes? What does he stand to lose?
I don't think he stands to lose anything, but I think that it would just be, take it with what you will, but I think it would just be more of a respect thing if he were to not come out and say something. You know what I'm saying?
Respect to who, though? He doesn't have to say who he's changing, right? Or what he's changing.
Yeah, I don't think he wants to have this negative aura around him or his office or the guys that maybe he may hire in the future, and that's. Once Nardo or Dunn or whoever gets fired, then they're like, oh, he was talking about him. I don't want him to talk about me. Like, there's a lot that would go into that. So I don't think that he's going to be fired up and be like, yeah, I'm getting rid of people. That again, I don't think that's him or his personality, nor do I think
he doesn't have to say personnel changes.
No,
he just has to say changes. That could be scheme. That could be anything, right?
Yeah. And he may come out and say that, but I don't think he's going to hoot and holler and scream and do all that. That's just not him. So I think that most what you're going to get is, I need to make some changes. You know, that's all you're going to get. And if somebody asks what changes, he'll go, we'll talk about that at another time.
Well, if you ask what changes, to me, that's not an appropriate question.
No.
I mean, if you're in a media and Mike Gundy is kind enough to say, yes, I'm going to make changes, guys. I love OSU, okay? Yeah. I love winning. I'm going to make changes. If he's kind enough to give us that statement, sorry, my bark.
You're good.
I'm just going to keep rolling with this because my barn's ready for a walk. But at that point, if you keep pressing it and you go, hey, coach, you mind telling me what changes? Whatever response you get from him, you deserve that response, in my opinion.
Yeah, you don't try to get more than what you should have, or feel like you should have, because really it's not our business as to what changes he's going to make. We'll figure them out, and like I said, it doesn't have to come from his mouth on what changes are being made. You're going to see those changes in the media because word is going to spread.
Totally agree, Chase. Hey, this has been a great conversation. Literally, I had no idea where we were going to go. I made no show notes. Usually those are the best ones for me because it doesn't pin you down into a particular topic.
Sure.
And one that whether I don't know if the fans like that topic or not. So we can usually wander around and at least hit a couple of different ones. So this has been a lot of fun, Chase.
Yeah, absolutely.